Welcome to Charter California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance, and we are joined by Gloria Negrete-McLeod. She is a member of the United States Congress, and I'd like to speak with you, of course, about healthcare reform. Here we are in California, and if we look at the numbers coming out of Covered California, they've been fairly positive. There have been some problems with healthcare.gov, although even those seem to be on the mend. What do you make of now the Affordable Care Act 3, 4, 5 months in?
Well, in California, in fact, I wrote an opinion piece highlighting how the Covered California works here in California. 3 million young people can stay on their parents' plan until the age of 26. 17 million children cannot be denied coverage because of pre-existing conditions. Over 1.5 million Californians have new financial assistance to afford the health coverage. And I also voted 48 times in the Congress not to defund the Affordable Health Care Act.
It's interesting. Of course, President Obama recently offered a State of the Union address, and it was actually a light moment when he talked about how, look, we're probably never going to agree on the Affordable Care Act, but need you vote another time to repeal, revoke, defund. Although, didn't the Republicans in some way with this most recent budget fund the Affordable Care Act?
I suppose you could say that.
Right.
Now they're going on a different tack. It's about providing family planning in the healthcare thing, and so now they're bringing bills up about not funding family planning.
Right. No, I know that recently there was a bill that was passed that would arguably be quite restrictive of reproductive rights.
Well, the funny thing is, it passes out of the House and it goes to the Senate, and it'll sit there. And if it ever gets to the president, he's not going to sign it.
Right.
So
it's an interesting dynamic, the choices of the Republican caucus in the House, passing bills that they know will have no chance of success because of a Democratic Senate and a Democratic president.
Well, I got to tell you, I went to the Congress, and everybody that went probably during this last election said, I'm a person that would like to work in a bipartisan manner, and I certainly would. And if they brought bills forward that we could all work together, I certainly would be amenable to that. But to constantly doing that, they criticized me for not voting on funding. I don't know, whatever it was that they have. But all of those bills that they kept saying that I voted no on, all had a provision in there about defunding the Affordable Health Care Act. So how are you going to vote on a bill?
No, I know. Like it's been a challenge for those on the Democratic side. That being said, when you look at the Affordable Care Act in California, there are many bright spots, but there is, one could argue, a blemish on the record. And that blemish focuses upon the numbers of Latinos that have participated in Covered California. And it looks even bleaker when you look at the number of Latinos who are Spanish dominant.
Well, I don't think, I know the papers and the newscasters make that, but most of the Californians that are of Latino origin speak English.
That's true. No, but I guess the point being that for those that are Spanish dominant, Covered California was not ready to offer them the materials they needed. They didn't have paper applications in Spanish. As I understand it, and look, you're in Washington, so you're not on the ground here, but as I've learned, now they have paper applications, now they have more navigators in the field that speak Spanish, so they are making efforts. But that being said, I do want to get a sense from you, Spanish dominant or English dominant, why is it, in your eyes, that Latino numbers in Covered California are lower than population?
I don't know. Probably the ones born here are probably up to date on what's going on in Covered California. Probably those that have become naturalized or become citizens recently probably don't trust government as much as Americans do, or people that are born here.
And I want to ask you about that. It's a very interesting dynamic. When you think about Latinos in California, many of them, if they were not born here, or even if they were, they came from governments in Central and South America that were quite repressive. And so the whole notion of
that government is going to give you something, they probably question it more than I would.
And on top of it, you got to give all this personal information, And then there's this idea. I was speaking with some of other representatives who are of Latino descent, and they described to me that often there's a family dynamic that can be somewhat unique to the Latino culture, whereby if the matriarch or the patriarch expresses concerns about, let's say, the Affordable Care Act, it will trickle down to all other members of the familial unit, and so it can be hard to kind of penetrate and get these large familial units to participate in a program that would presumably benefit the family. Does that make sense to you?
Yes. And again, you're talking about probably not the ones born here,
right,
that have been here
of
a long
course.
time, but probably more recent people that have come here, that have become naturalized, that have now lived here. They're a little bit more hesitant to say, why am I going to give you my information?
Right. I want to ask you about the undocumented. As I'm sure you know, under the Affordable Care Act, the undocumented are not covered. Interestingly, the children of undocumented are covered. But one of your former colleagues, Ricardo Lara of the California State Senate, is proposing that California cover the undocumented. He is at this stage trying to figure out how best to do that because, as you've taught me, Affordable Care Act says you cannot cover undocumented. What do you think about the idea, philosophically, of a state making a determination that they are going to cover the undocumented?
Well, let me put it this way. Let's not talk about politics.
Oh, please.
Let's not talk about politics.
Okay.
If we were to cover everybody and everybody was healthy, and people didn't have to go to emergency rooms that actually cost the state would be saving money. So we're not talking politics, we're talking about realistic things that happen, that when someone goes, whether you're documented or undocumented, but if you have no insurance and you go to the hospitals, emergency care, that rises the cost of health care immediately to the state, because hospitals are bound to serve anybody that walks into their doors. Not all hospitals do, they'll send them somewhere else.
Right.
But if they do service these people, then the state is on the hook for the cost.
Right. So that being said, do you believe philosophically that a state like California should look at covering these folks, the undocumented, as a way to try to bring, through your argument, the cost down?
Well, fiscally, that would be the best thing. Philosophically, then you have a different...
And that's the politics of it.
Yes, yeah.
Let's talk about the politics of immigration most generally. We know that the Democrats have been pushing for immigration reform for quite some time. The Senate was able to get a bill out with some Republican support. Lately, what we've heard, it's okay if your throat has a tickle. Lately, what we've heard is that the Republican caucus in the House is considering taking up immigration reform legislation. Do you buy it? Do you believe that they really will take it up in a way that can pass muster?
Well, it would be wonderful if it was true. I mean, there has been the Senate bill has been sitting in the House since last year. The president said he's ready to sign a comprehensive immigration reform bill. I'm ready to vote for a bill that's there. I'm not
and
sure
some have argued that if the Senate bill got onto the floor of the House, it would pass. Even though the Democrats are in the minority, there'd be enough Republicans that would be willing to move forward. But that's not how it works in the House of Representatives.
That's not how it works.
And so what do you see happening in the future on immigration reform in the House? Do you think that during this legislative cycle we will see some bill reach the floor of the House of Representatives?
I would hope so. I think the Republicans had a retreat. We'll see what comes from that. I think the Speaker is ready to move on a bill also. There's some contingent of his party that are very unfavorable to any kind of reform.
Right.
But I think there's a good number of Republican colleagues who are ready to vote for a reform
Okay,
bill.
her name is Gloria Negrete-McLeod. She is a member of the United States Congress representing significant portions of San Bernardino County. My name is Brad Pomerance. This is Charter California Edition. Starter California edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Paul Zellerbach. He is the district attorney in Riverside County. He's running for re-election, the primary and general. Right now, only 2 candidates will be held in June 2014. I want to speak with you about a program that recently received, I think it was another state grant. Is it its first state grant, the DUI vertical prosecution team?
It's our second state grant. We received the first one at the end of 2011. And it's a statewide grant, but actually it's federal dollars.
Oh, okay. So explain the DUI vertical prosecution team, because it is something a little different than what one may realize.
Absolutely, and it's very specialized. It relates to not DUIs, driving under the influence while under the influence of alcohol. Those are pretty more straightforward prosecutions, right. But this deals specifically with impaired drivers who are under the influence of different types of drugs or narcotics, which is more difficult and cumbersome.
And you've taught me this, it's fascinating. If someone has 0.08 alcohol in their blood, there's a presumption of, is it guilt?
It's not guilt. The law in California, if you have a 0.08 blood alcohol level or above, the law presumes that you are impaired and not a safe driver.
Okay.
We don't have any presumption like that with respect to drugs or narcotics.
So I'll use this example, forgive me, but Justin Bieber was recently arrested and the toxicology came back. He tested positive for marijuana and Xanax, which is, I guess, a
prescription medication.
Drug. And so there is no chart to say if you have this amount of blood, of marijuana in your blood, you are presumed intoxicated.
No, and that's the problem that we have to face every day in court, is the fact that there are so many different kinds of narcotics and drugs on the market, both legal and illegal,
right, that's true,
that people consume that might impair their ability, but each drug has a different effect or different level of impairment.
And so let me just ask you, if I may, if someone tests positive for Xanax, for example, which is a legal drug with a prescription.
Correct.
And they have a prescription.
Yes.
What happens?
Well, it depends upon the level.
Okay.
There's a therapeutic level,
and
sometimes even a therapeutic level. If you look on the prescription bottle, it'll say, do not drive
no,
vehicle.
Yes, I've seen, my dad's a pharmacist. I've seen those, right.
And in fact, in California, pharmacies now, or pharmacists, are required to personally advise the consumer of the effects of that medication before they dispense it.
And that's why you need specialized prosecutors.
Absolutely.
And that's why this DUI vertical prosecution team has been so invaluable for your office.
And it's not only the prosecution of these types of offenses, it's also basically educating and informing law enforcement. Because a lot of your patrol officers aren't very specialized when it comes to the investigation of drivers that are impaired through drug consumption or even prescription medications.
Right. And the key distinction with this program is you will have the deputy DA prosecute all stages of the case.
Correct.
Whereas in the past, if it was maybe a strict alcohol DUI, it could be that different DAs would take different parts of the prosecution.
Absolutely. One DA might file the case, another DA might handle the case initially in court, and a third DA could prosecute the case at trial level.
Right.
With respect to our vertical prosecution unit concerning these specific types of driving while impaired cases, one prosecutor takes it from its birth when they first file the case to its conclusion.
I would presume that the conviction rate for pure alcohol DUIs is fairly high because of the presumption you just described.
Absolutely.
What about non-alcohol DUI?
Well, that was the problem that we were facing, was that we didn't have a lot of experts that could testify in that area. Our prosecutors weren't well versed in the different medications and prescriptions that impaired drivers. Nor law enforcement. So our conviction rate is going to be substantially increased with this vertical unit.
Has it been?
Absolutely. We had 300 prosecutions just last year.
Successful?
Successful.
Oh, right, convictions, right.
Correct.
Congratulations. I want to talk about another program in which your office participates, and it's known as the Every 15 Minutes Organization. I know, and I understand you were not at this event. It was actually, I think, maybe right after you were elected. It was in 2011. And Murrieta High School held a mock car wreck whereby 2 students were killed, a driver was arrested under the influence, and it happened all right there in front of the entire Murrieta student body. It was chilling. I only read the article, but I can only imagine, and it was extremely well orchestrated. Talk to me about the impact of programs. Oh, let me tell you one more thing. They also, on the day of that event, pulled a student out of a class every 15 minutes because that's how often someone is killed by a drunk driver.
Throughout the nation.
Throughout
That's
the nation. I just
true.
got chills talking about that because I can only imagine the impact of students as every 15 minutes a student is being yanked.
Correct. Well, it's kind of almost a scared straight
Right.
type of program. It really brings it home, and when you pull, first of all, you go through the process in front of the students and they see it up close and personal,
Right.
and it has a dramatic impact and effect upon them. Plus, by pulling a student out every 15 minutes, you realize a life is lost every 15 minutes, and again, it brings it home.
I have to admit something. I have admitted this before on the air, but I want to admit it to you. When I was, I think, 19 years old, I drove impaired. I was not arrested. I mean, even talking about it is horrifying because it was so scary. It was such a horrible moment driving like that. And I swore I never would do it again, and I never have.
Well, oftentimes, even not at the time, but after the fact, you wake up or realize the next morning, why did I do that, or how did I do that, or I'm
right.
Through the grace of God, I'm
literally,
still alive.
Literally,
I didn't hurt somebody.
That's exactly right. But my point is that I got lucky in that I didn't get caught, I didn't hit anyone, and it scared me. Programs like this, I have to think, do the same.
They do, and MAD also participates in these
Right.
programs, and they bring in sometimes a demolished, crashed vehicle, an actual vehicle that was, hit and run.
Tell me about the mock trials that you've participated and seen.
Well, not only do they do these reenactments of a crash or an accident, they do a mock trial with respect to a DUI. So the students, again, can see the law, understand how it works in court, realize there's a judge there who sentences the individual to time in custody.
I don't know, I've seen billboards around town, and it's someone blowing into a breathalyzer, and the caption is, "You just blew $10,000." Because as I understand it, that's how much it can cost to defend yourself.
At least,
At
or
least,
more.
at more. And so there's no doubt that there are dramatic consequences, even if there's no accident per se.
Well, there's the custody consequence,
Right.
there's a financial or monetary consequence, plus you're required to attend drinking driver classes, and it could be anywhere from 90 days to a year or more.
And so are these programs effective? Do you feel as if we're getting to our youth? Because look, we were all young once, and why would I drive drunk when I was 19? That was just ridiculous. But
I think they are, absolutely, because what we're seeing now is, unfortunately, more consumption of marijuana in our schools.
Really?
And because they think it's okay.
And well, think about it. It's been legalized in 2 states now.
Correct.
We have our medical marijuana ordinance.
And the same thing with prescription medication that a student might take out of their
Well,
parents'
ask me,
cabinet.
Talk to me about marijuana, because I do think there's a perception that driving while impaired by marijuana is not as harmful, dramatic, severe as with alcohol.
Well, the experts tell us that's not true.
Really?
They tell us that marijuana does impair your response time, your cognitive abilities to think and react quickly.
I would think that's the biggest issue, because you kind of slow down. When someone's under the influence of marijuana, it kind of brings you down, and so you can't react as quickly as you need to.
You can't react as quickly, nor can you process all of the things that are going on or required with respect to safely operating a motor vehicle.
So what can we do to spread the message? Is there a way to get involved with the Riverside DA's office on these programs, or what's next?
You bet. We partner with Every 15 Minutes. We partner with MAD. We also partner with community groups in educating and informing not only students but
Right.
adults with respect to the law. And it's an awareness,
Right.
that even prescription medication
Of
that you
course.
validly can possess and use
Right.
may not allow you to properly drive a vehicle.
And I'm sure DAs in all other 57 counties have similar programs.
That's not true at all. Not true at all.
We'll talk about that next time.
All
His
right.
name is Paul Zellerbach. He is the DA for Riverside County. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Charter California Edition. Welcome back. It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Mike Spence. He is a member of the West Covina City Council, a new member, and who says every vote doesn't count. Let's talk about your recent election. I love talking about these scenarios. So there were 3 seats up, 2 appointed incumbents, 1 incumbent didn't run, 9 people ran. On election night, what happened?
Well, on election night, I had lost.
You had lost on election night?
I had lost on
By
election
how much?
night. I had about 24 votes.
Okay.
I had come in 4th. There were 3 seats available. The 2 appointed incumbents were far behind.
They lost, so they're
lost.
out. Okay.
And then what happens is the registrar goes through the process of counting all the provisional ballots and absentee ballots that came in. And as that time went on, I kept gaining votes.
Okay.
And finally, on the last update that they updated West Covina, the city of West Covina, I won by 2 votes.
2 votes.
2 votes.
And how many days after was that from the election day?
That was about 10 days afterwards.
That's a nice amount of time.
It was a long amount of time. As I was telling people that, as I kept getting closer, they go, "Hey, you're getting closer," and I would say, "Yeah," to a bigger disappointment.
Right. Well stated.
Losing by
But
8.
it was only on the last update that you won.
That's right. Correct.
Okay, so you win by 2 votes. Then what happens?
Well, then what happened was the person who had won on election day, he filed for a recount.
Which you can understand.
I can understand that. Yeah. It takes 3 days. It costs him $20,000.
Even though it was that close, he still has to pay for it?
Absolutely. Whoever is the loser in the case of the race has to put up the money for the recount. And if it changes, for example, had he won, he would have got the money back.
Interesting.
But it's a gamble. He has to
gamble.
And I was much to my surprise, I was actually overjoyed that it was him rather than me having to make that decision.
Would you have done it?
Well, I probably would have done it. I don't know if I would have gone the whole amount, because there was a point where it was clear I was going to win, but I'm not sure I would have gone the whole way.
And what ultimately happened?
Well, the registrar told us that we had won by 6 votes. I had won by 6 votes after every vote was counted.
But what's fascinating is you both gained a chunk.
Well, actually, yeah, I'd be concerned about our ballots after this, because every candidate, keep in mind there are all these other candidates too, they're getting votes. Yeah. I gained a total of 40-something votes. And so while the margin stayed a little bit the same, there was about 2% of the votes that were not counted for each candidate.
Were they provisionals, or were the ballots were oddly marked? Or
actually, most of the changes came from those that were cast on election day. There were very few changes on those that were cast by absentee ballot. And the only thing that we could speculate on, or that people would say, was that when it ran through the
counter
or whatever, that the mark was not big enough, but it was clearly marked when you were doing it by hand. But for some reason, it didn't get picked up by the machine.
What was also crazy is, just because of the intricacies of the holidays, the registrar or the clerk, whomever, swore you in before the recount was done.
That's right. I was sworn in on Tuesday in December, which was the day that people were supposed to be sworn in had they won, which I was the certified winner.
At that point, you were,
I was
you
a
were
certified
2 points
winner.
ahead.
That's right. I was a certified winner, and actually I had my kids swear in, which was really cool. Yeah. And they got to be deputized and everything. But then the next day, the recount started.
Oh my!
So literally, for the next, from Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we were counting ballots. And the whole time people would ask me, well, what happened? You got sworn in.
It does. Do you know?
And I have no idea. And no one could really explain to me what happens, that they would recertify the new amount, the new winner, and then I would be gone, I guess. And so I joked about it when I got sworn in that I didn't want to. Everyone's thinking it.
How could you not?
I just said
2 votes. I mean, that's crazy.
I just said I hope that I'm not instituting the council member for a day program.
Exactly. I've actually interviewed some folks. I interviewed one time the registrar from San Luis Obispo County, and this past election cycle, or maybe the one before that, there was a community services district election, CSDs. You may have heard of CSDs. That came out in a tie.
Oh wow.
A tie. After recounts. And so they wound up, I guess, pulling straws or whatever it is.
Well actually, in West Covina, I was on the school board until this election. And we had an election like that where it was tied.
And?
Well, we flipped a coin.
You flipped a coin.
We flipped a coin, and then the person who lost the coin toss filed for the recount.
Oh, it was before the recount that they did
It was before the recount. It was certified because it was certified as a tie. And so we flipped the coin. The person who lost the coin toss filed for the recount, put up the money, and ended up winning by 3 votes. And so he got his money back.
Wow.
And so it was, I've seen
I love
that kind
this
of unusual
stuff.
stuff. Yeah.
So let's talk about another election matter. We know that there's this concept of one person, one vote. And we also know that politicians and experts can draw lines in a certain way, so certain groups are favored. But we also know that in many cities, there was a decision by the city's forefathers to have city council elections be at large. And so there may be, you have 5 council members?
We have 5 council members.
So no matter where you live, you can run, and you could all be from the same neighborhood, but everyone votes. Well, for many years, there has been the suggestion, and courts have ruled, that can be disenfranchising to certain groups, especially minority groups. And so there have been lawsuits filed, there have been lawsuits won. I know Anaheim right now, for example, is going through a process whereby they are putting to their voters if they want to be elected at large or by district. The courts seem to prefer by district. Now, one of your your predecessors, Roger Hernandez, in the state assembly, has proposed that all cities over, is it 100,000, sir?
Yeah, 100,000.
Would be required to go by district. What do you think?
Well, I think this has actually been a very important issue to the Assemblyman Hernandez.
Right.
He sponsored a plan along with another council member that would have put West Covina into districts. We have just over 100,000 people in the district. And that district was overwhelming. That plan was overwhelmingly rejected by voters in West Covina.
When was this? Do you remember?
It would have been 2-3 years ago.
Oh, so not long ago.
Yeah, not long ago. Completely overwhelmed.
What's interesting is the courts don't seem to care. Sometimes, some courts, if the voters vote down going to districts.
Right. Unfortunately, the voters care, and the people that represent them care. But you're right. Courts sometimes could care less what voters say.
What's so interesting, I've talked to some folks about this, is intuitively one could argue, well, yeah, let's split it up into districts, and then, the people can vote for their neighborhood candidate. But then you can create what's called a silo mentality. And so what winds up is the councilman from Area A only cares about Area A, whereas if the councilman who happens to live in Area A represents the entire city because they run at large, they have a greater interest in the entire city. So it's not that easy.
No, it's not easy, and obviously there's a certain number, obviously the city of Los Angeles has to be in districts. I mean, clearly there's that issue. But we can use the same logic that Assemblyman Hernandez has and talk about the state of California. There are more state senators in California. They represent more people than a congressional person does. So are we getting representation from our state senate, or should we have 3 times as many?
Oh, no, I mean,
and you can make that argument. The question is, at what number, at what point, is it no longer representative of the people?
There are 40 state senators representing almost 1 million constituents each. There are a good number of states that don't even have 1 million residents.
Exactly. And so, what is that representative for California to have that many people represented by one person in the state senate? You have to ask those questions. The problem in West Covina is, there are sections of West Covina. It's not readily clear, except for a couple exceptions, like where you would say, oh, this is where we draw the line for the south side or the, that north side.
How large is West Covina geographically?
Oh, I don't know the square miles.
But
it's very
expansive?
Diverse. Oh, yeah, it's very expansive.
It's a large city.
It's a large city.
Geographically.
I mean, the city of Covina, which you think we'd be west of, we're also east and south of.
Is that true?
Yeah, we're surrounded on 3 sides just because of the way the incorporation eventually went.
So why are you called West Covina if you're east and south of it?
That's how it started.
Okay.
And so, we have...
You're bigger than Covina.
Oh, absolutely bigger than Covina. And so the question is, why is 100,000 the magic number? To me, the answer, if you talk to, my personal opinion is that the Assemblyman has wanted this in the West Covina for a long time.
Right.
And so, this is one way to get West Covina to do it.
But obviously it would apply to other cities.
Applies to other
Whittier,
cities.
Compton, Palmdale. Palmdale's had a major issue
Whittier's
with
having an election on this, actually, in June. Whittier's having an election on this in June.
So what do you think happens?
What do I think happens? I think it depends on whether or not it passes.
Right, but what do you think? I mean, as a student of Sacramento, which I know you are, do you think this passes?
I could see it passing. I'm not for sure it's going to pass, but I could see it passing. I think it's more likely you'll have more action by the courts. But, one of the things that they say is that people are being underrepresented somehow.
Yeah.
And yet, like in West Covina, while we don't have a Latino on the council, but obviously we did, Assemblyman Hernandez being one, we have Asian American, we have an African American, which are very...
His name is Mike Spence. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Charter California Edition.